Where are you, Bret? There you are.
Oh, my God.
Special report, everybody.
Yeah, he looks happy.
There he is.
He's going to kill this. This doesn't have a long life left.
All right. Hey, thanks. This is a Fox News Alert. I'm Bret Baier in Washington. There is considerable drama right now in the building behind me. As you look live at the House floor there, at this hour, there is real doubt on Capitol Hill that there are enough votes to pass an even temporary funding bill to keep the government fully open. We're awaiting a vote in the House on the measure to keep the government funded past tomorrow night. The doubt is for the vote tonight in the House. They're counting heads, let alone the uphill battle counting the heads in the Senate to get 60 votes. Should tonight's bill pass in the House. The House expected to vote sometime after 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Both sides are also working on their strategies for the blame game should the deadline pass without an agreement. We have Fox team coverage tonight. John Roberts at the White House with mixed messages coming from the president today. But we start off with Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel on Capitol Hill with the very latest, which, by the way, changes by the minute. Good evening, Mike.
Well, Brett, good evening. It is a very tense situation with a key conservative, Mark Meadows of North Carolina, saying Republican leaders at this moment don't have the votes to pass a critical government funding extension. House GOP leadership aides say there is no change in plans, and Republican leaders are urging to get it done.
Address the real deadlines that are here. The real deadlines by continuing the funding for our military. Extend the children's health insurance program. And instead of our men and women in uniform being treated like bargaining chips, we can keep working on getting the resources that they need.
Pushing for an immigration fix this week, the House Democratic leader said she's a no.
So having nothing to do with protecting our dreamers or anything else, we will be opposing this continuing resolution.
To win some Democratic votes, the package includes a 6-year extension of children's health insurance. Pelosi's not impressed.
This is like giving you a bowl of doggy doo, put a cherry on top and call it a chocolate sundae. This is nothing.
Then there's the national security issue, with this being the 4th continuing resolution since October.
Mr. Speaker, what's your case to national security lawmakers who worry that every day under a CR damages the military?
The CR is not good for the military, but what's worse for the military is a government shutdown. What's even worse for the military is a government shutdown followed by a sequester, which is what would happen if we don't pass a CR.
On the Senate side, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has warned his GOP colleagues about the possibility of being in session this weekend if the continuing resolution fails. McConnell emailed at 10:17 a.m. Plan to work, quote, if Senate Democrats follow through and are willing to shut down the government and the children's health insurance program. And McConnell called for GOP unity. We are strongest when we stick together. That will produce the best spending deal and the best DACA deal. But some of his fellow Republicans are unhappy.
I think it's inexcusable, so I'll be a no vote because I'm not going to vote to continue to put the country further into debt.
We're not going to get a CR through the Congress until we have a pathway forward to increase defense spending, deal with the immigration, chips, and everything else.
Winning some Democrats will be critical, with 60 yes votes needed in the Senate and only 50 Republicans likely to vote.
It doesn't resolve the fate of the dreamers. It doesn't include an increase in military funding that members from both sides of the aisle would support. It's just another kick of the can down the road because the Republicans, both in the Senate, the House, and the White House, can't get their act together.
Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke tweeted today, we fully expect the government to continue operations. However, in the event of a shutdown, public lands will be as accessible as safely possible under the law.
In the Senate, Democrats are saying they have the votes to block the bill, and already Republicans are saying Democrats would be siding with 800,000 dreamers over the health insurance of 9 million children. But the first test is the House tonight. Brett?
You know, Mike, the Freedom Caucus apparently just met with the Speaker and leadership, and we're getting from a GOP aide that leadership met and agreed to hold a separate vote to help bolster military readiness and other national security issues. And now the Freedom Caucus leaders are taking taking that to their caucus to see if they can support the continuing resolution.
No question, ongoing negotiations, and there have been a lot of meetings back and forth trying to see if they can get those final votes, but pressure is designed to produce a result, Brett.
Yeah, and that's in the House, let alone, as you said, the Senate. Mike Emanuel following minute by minute up on the Hill. Mike, thanks.
Sure.
Meantime, President Trump is supporting the CR plan, but many in his party remain unsure exactly what he really wants. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts fills us in on that and the president's tax cut victory lap today in Pennsylvania. Good evening, John.
Brett, good evening to you. After what appeared to be another Twitter misfire early this morning, the White House staff was left to issue another "What the President Meant" memo on his support for the spending bill as the president headed west to Pittsburgh to sell his new tax reform law.
The signs of America's comeback can be seen at companies like this one, which just had its most successful year in its 35-year history. Congratulations. Good job.
President Trump taking to the road for the first time since signing tax reform into law, touting the benefits of a plan he says is selling itself, pointing to Apple's big announcement yesterday.
Apple has just announced that they are bringing $350 billion and putting it into investment into our country. $350 billion. 350.
President Trump also suggesting Democrats are jealous of his success with the tax cut.
I really believe the Democrats want to shut down to get off the subject of the tax cuts because they've worked so well. Nobody thought, including the Democrats, they could work this well.
The White House threw its full support behind the House plan to fund the government through February 16th, delay Obamacare taxes, and fully fund the Children's Health Insurance Program for 6 years. The White House Budget Office saying in a statement, the administration supports the bill's multi-year funding extension of the Children's Health Insurance Program. But as he did with the FISA bill last week, President Trump touched off a flurry of head-scratching with an early morning tweet that said CHIP should be part of a long-term solution, not a 30-day or short-term extension. Republicans in Congress were left perplexed.
Well, I'm not sure what the president means. What this would do, though, is would it reauthorize the CHIP program for, I believe, 5 years. So it's not just a 30-day extension.
Leaving the White House press office to again play cleanup in a statement saying the president supports the continuing resolution introduced in the House. On a fix for DACA, White House officials say they are closer to a deal than has been reported, but the president reminding on Twitter, if there is no wall, there is no deal. The wall was the centerpiece in Chief of Staff John Kelly's talks with the House Hispanic Caucus yesterday. Kelly telling Democrats, who immediately leaked it, that the president's position on a border wall was not fully informed during the campaign.
And we're going to build a wall. It's going to be built. And who's going to pay for the wall? 100%.
Kelly told the Hispanic Caucus the wall won't cover the entire border, and there's no way the U.S. will get the money to build it from the Mexican government.
I told him that, there's been an evolutionary process that this president has gone through as a campaign, and I pointed out to all of the members that were in the room that they all say things during the course of campaigns that may or may not be fully informed.
Sources say the president was furious over Kelly's comments and told him so when Kelly returned to the White House. This morning, the president tweeted, "The wall is the wall. It has never changed or evolved from the first day I conceived of it." But the damage appeared only temporary. The president, who needs Kelly to keep the trains running, was praising him this afternoon.
He's great. I think he's doing a great job. I think General Kelly has done a really great job. He is a very special guy.
Back on the spending bill, a senior White House official told Fox News earlier today that they thought the chances of the president getting a temporary spending measure were about 50-50. That's a huge erosion in optimism from earlier this week, and according to some Republicans that we've talked to since, overly optimistic considering what's going on in the Senate. Brett?
Okay, John, thank you. The House is in recess currently, but still expect that vote tonight. The House will consider a bill that would require lawmakers to pay for sexual harassment settlements as well. Currently, taxpayers are on the hook. The legislation was announced today. It comes after months of revelations about sexual harassment allegations and settlements concerning members of Congress. The Trump administration wants to make it easier for medical professionals to avoid providing services that conflict with their moral or religious beliefs. As you can imagine, pro-choice forces are furious. Correspondent Doug McKelway has the story.
We will not allow people of faith to be targeted, bullied, or silenced anymore.
More than 8 months since President Trump signed an executive order instructing agencies to expand religious liberty under federal law, his administration today delivered some results. The Department of Health and Human Services announced the creation of the Conscience and Religious Freedom Division within its Office of Civil Rights.
We see that health care is the next area where the issues of conscience and the issues of life and death are coming to the fore.
The announcement comes as a backlash to several Obama-era regulations, including the Obamacare requirement that non-church employers had to provide contraceptive coverage or face fines. An absurd demand, critics said, for organizations like the Little Sisters of the Poor. Though the Supreme Court ultimately overturned the contraceptive mandate, there were countless other alleged civil rights abuses, as with this midwife who contends she was rejected for a job at a health care center because of her pro-life views.
I was then told that because of these convictions, I would not be allowed to interview and proceed with the hiring process.
The new division at HHS will make it easier for doctors, nurses, and other health providers to opt out of services that violate their moral or religious beliefs. And it will ensure hospitals, clinics, and other health centers accommodate religious beliefs.
We are fighting back!
That may be problematic in such a polarized country where one citizen's civil right is often seen as another's injustice.
What we all know is that they have set up a new agency to discriminate against LGBT people and women. This is about pediatricians refusing to treat children because they have gay parents. This is about transgender people being turned away from emergency rooms and doctors' offices.
Mirroring that view, the National Abortion Rights Action League, which today called the new HHS a place, quote, where science, ethics, and concern for the well-being of all Americans are non-existent. But the decision may only energize Trump's base, especially evangelicals. 63% of them approve of the job he's doing, down only 3% from October. The timing of today's announcement is not a coincidence, coming on the eve of the annual March for Life. President Trump will speak to the crowd via satellite link. Speaker Ryan will address the marchers in person. Brett?
Doug, thank you. Well, what do you think? Do you think the creation of the Religious Freedom Office is a good thing? Let me know on Twitter at Bret Baier. Use the hashtag Special Report, or on Facebook at facebook.com/BretBaierSR. If you have not come down with the flu yet, chances are someone in your family, at school, or at work already has. This year's flu strain appears to be especially strong and resistant to the vaccine. Chief Correspondent Jonathan Hunt reports tonight from Los Angeles.
The only way I can describe the way he looked is he looked like a fish out of water. I still can't believe it.
Jessica Deason-Doll's 12-year-old son Michael died last week within 36 hours of developing flu-like symptoms. An autopsy is pending, but Jessica believes Michael may be one of what the Centers for Disease Control says are at least 20 children killed by a particularly virulent strain of influenza.
This is the earliest we've ever seen this severe a flu season since CDC's been tracking it. It is already peaking, and it's only the beginning of January.
49 of 50 states, Hawaii the lucky exception, are reporting widespread flu activity, according to the CDC. The spread of this season's H3N2 strain has been worsened by consistently cold weather in much of the country and a vaccine that is considerably less than perfect, although doctors say the vaccine is still worth getting, and the CDC says it is improving.
Ultimately, we would love to have a longer-lasting, more broadly protective, quote, universal vaccine. It may be a while before we get that.
More than half a dozen school districts in Oklahoma and one in Texas have shut down for at least a day because of the outbreak. And here in California, the Loma Linda Medical Center in San Bernardino has set up a triage tent outside to cope with the additional burdens caused by the epidemic.
Our emergency rooms usually sees between 220 and 240 patients a day. We're now seeing upwards of 280. We even peaked out over 300 last week. So if we get too many patients, we're moving our less sick patients out to here.
Jessica Deason-Doll, meantime, buried 12-year-old Michael today.
I'm a mom. I'm supposed to protect my kids, and I couldn't.
And nationwide this season, according to the latest figures from the National Center for Health Statistics, 759 people have died because of the flu, and the season runs through March. Brett?
Amazing, John. Thank you. The parents of 13 siblings who were allegedly held in captivity in their family's Southern California home are being charged tonight with committing years of torture and abuse that left their children malnourished, undersized, and with cognitive impairments. This comes after the escape of one of those children led police to the home last weekend. The father is also being charged with a sex crime. We are still keeping an eye on the House action or inaction at this moment. They're in recess right now, which was expected. Republican leaders fear they may not have the votes to pass even a temporary funding measure to keep the government open after tomorrow night. Over in the Senate, Democrats are saying they do have the votes to kill the bill. We're all over all the developments. We'll bring you an update as soon as we get one. Up next, what went right and what did not for President Trump as he prepares to celebrate his first year in office. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 10 in Phoenix, where police suspect a convicted felon charged with murder in the killing of his mother and stepfather may have committed 7 other killings. The suspect is 35-year-old Cleophas Cooksey. The other victims include his former girlfriend's brother, as well as people who appeared to be random targets during a 3-week period starting in late November. Fox 13 in Tampa, as the Florida Highway Patrol says a suburban Tampa woman died because a faulty Takata airbag ruptured during a crash she should have survived. U.S. safety regulators today named models from 14 automakers that are being recalled because of Takata airbags. The recalls are part of the largest in U.S. history. And this is a live look at Seattle from our affiliate Q13 Fox. The big story out there tonight, Amazon narrows its choices for its new headquarters facility to 20 cities. That's down from the original 238. The list includes big towns such as New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, along with smaller ones such as Raleigh, North Carolina, and Austin, Texas. The $5 billion facility will create as many as 50,000 high-paying jobs. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back at 11 p.m. Eastern. The Trump administration is removing Haiti, Belize, and Samoa from the list of countries whose laborers are eligible to come to the U.S. as guest workers. It says the workers have a high rate of fraud and overstaying the terms of their admission. Also today, the government is automatically extending work permits for Haitians on temporary protected status through July. The U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services concedes not all re-registrants will receive the work authorization cards before the current ones expire Monday. Saturday is the 1-year anniversary of President Trump's inauguration. Hard to believe. Over the next 2 nights, we will look at year 1, what has gone right for the president and what has not. Here's correspondent Kevin Cork from the White House.
2017 was a year of tremendous achievement.
Promises made, promises kept, say White House officials. And while many of the president's guarantees have come to fruition, others face an uncertain future.
I will build a great wall on our southern border, and I will have Mexico pay for that wall.
Prototypes built, yes, but 363 days on the job, and not a single mile of the president's promised big, beautiful wall has been funded or constructed, nor has a plan been mapped out to get Mexico to pay for it. As for the Affordable Care Act,
Obamacare has to be replaced, and we will do it, and we will do it very quickly.
Except he hasn't.
The motion is not agreed to.
Clearly a disappointing moment.
White House officials acknowledged the failure to repeal and replace Obamacare was one of the biggest disappointments of the president's year, a hard-earned lesson for a political novice on the limitations of presidential power, though Congress did eliminate the individual mandate, and the effort to chip away at the law continues. Speaking of continuing, so does America's participation in the Iran nuclear deal.
My number 1 priority is to dismantle the disastrous deal with Iran.
Just last week, for the second time, the president continued to honor the deal, and he agreed to waive new sanctions for now. Elsewhere on the international front, Mr. Trump once famously said this:
I know more about ISIS than the generals do, believe me. Would bomb the out of them.
Indeed, the president's plan has exacted a heavy toll on the terror group, with White House officials crediting Mr. Trump's decision to boost troop numbers and allow more airstrikes for the campaign's success. And speaking of success,
the number of Americans applying for unemployment benefits just hit a 45-year low.
With record low unemployment and a record high stock market, the Trump economy is red hot, thanks in part to massive deregulation since he took office and the historic new tax law. But the president's most enduring promise may have come by way of the judiciary.
So help me God.
Successfully nominating Neil Gorsuch to the U.S. Supreme Court and seating dozens of federal judges ultimately could do a lot more to cement his legacy than anything else he accomplished in year one. Another promise kept. He said he'd be unconventional, and indeed he has. And even though it's cost him politically, especially because of Twitter, the president feels like the authenticity helps more than it hurts. Brett?
Kevin Cork in the White House briefing room. Kevin, thanks. Part 2 tomorrow. Here's a shocker. A government agency saying it does not need more money. White House Budget Director Mick Mulvaney, who is also running the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB, has told the Federal Reserve the office has enough money to operate without new funding for another 3 months. Many in the Trump administration would like to see the Obama-era agency eliminated completely. Stocks were down today. The Dow lost 98, the S&P 500 dropped 5, the Nasdaq was off 2. Up next, a look at what some lawmakers say are serious abuses in government surveillance programs as Congress reauthorizes the law. First, beyond our borders tonight, a senior European Union official says Greece is close to passing its next bailout review. It would put the country within reach of ending its 8-year rescue program that saved it from bankruptcy, but required hugely painful austerity cuts. Pope Francis wrapping up his visit to Chile by performing a first-of-its-kind airborne papal wedding ceremony and then celebrating Mass. The Pope did the honors for a pair of flight attendants who were wed years ago in a civil service but were not married in the eyes of the church. And another first, a rescue with a drone caught on camera. It happened off the coast of New South Wales. A lifeguard noticed 2 boys struggling in the water and dispatched the brand new drone. It dropped an inflatable rescue pod to the teens who swam back safely. Just some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight. We'll be right back. House is in recess right now, expected to come back soon. Vote in the 7 o'clock hour, we expect, in Martha's Hour. We'll keep you updated as we learn more. The Senate has extended a program that allows for U.S. spy agencies to collect information on foreigners outside the country. Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act permits intelligence officials to oversee communications of foreigners outside the U.S. without a warrant, even if they include Americans. It now goes to the president's desk for his signature. The FISA approval comes as lawmakers begin reviewing a memo detailing alleged abuses in surveillance programs. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge has details.
Behind closed doors, the House Intelligence Committee made the memo documenting alleged government surveillance abuses available to all lawmakers. They could not discuss the contents, but some demanded its release.
This memo must become public, that it alarms us greatly, and that I believe that the consequence of its release will be major changes in people currently working at the FBI and Department of Justice.
4 pages, you knew as soon as you read them and you think about this, is this happening in America or is this the KGB? That's how alarming it is.
The president's former chief strategist, Steve Bannon, was a no-show for a second day of closed-door testimony before the House panel, with sources telling Fox Bannon is not sure what he can say about the transition and his time at the White House. This comes after the House Intelligence Committee took the unusual step of issuing him a subpoena during Tuesday's private interview.
He didn't answer our questions, and we expect our subpoena to be complied with, and we're working with he and his lawyer to make that happen.
The White House emphasized every administration has an obligation to protect executive privilege, which includes presidential conversations. On special report, the president's chief of staff played down contact with Bannon after he left the government.
He's certainly never returned to the White House, and with the exception of a few phone calls here and there, very, very little contact with the White House.
The president's lawyer told the CBS News podcast that it's a virtual certainty Mr. Trump will be interviewed by special counsel Robert Mueller.
Do you think there is any danger for the president in that encounter?
You know, I would hope that a fair-minded Office of Special Counsel would approach it in a dutiful way, consistent with precedent, and it wouldn't be a mere perjury trap.
The House Intelligence Committee voted unanimously to release the transcript of Glenn Simpson, whose firm Fusion GPS was paid by the DNC and Clinton campaign to compile the Trump dossier. Democrats blocked the release of transcripts for Fusion GPS employees Peter Fritsch and Thomas Catan, who took the fifth.
The Simpson transcript was released late today, and he alleges to lawmakers that the Russians appear to have targeted conservative groups, including the NRA. Fox News first reported some of these details back in November, and at the time, the NRA denied it. Bret?
Catherine, thank you. Let's get perspective now on the Glenn Simpson testimony released today and the surveillance stories. Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano is with us tonight. Judge, good to see you.
Bret, likewise.
You and I read through this transcript. We should point out the Senate had one that Dianne Feinstein put out. Correct. This is the House interview of Glenn Simpson.
Correct.
A couple of things struck us. One was page 54, Simpson talking to House members. As far as I'm concerned, we are now, as opposed to back then we had what appeared to be credible allegations of some sort of pattern of surreptitious contacts between the Trump campaign and Russian people, either working for the government or acting on behalf of the Russian government, as Chris wrote, referencing Chris Steele. It was, I think a wide-ranging conspiracy was the way he put it. What struck you about this testimony?
Well, a couple of things struck me. First of all, the witness does not have personal knowledge of what he's talking about. So he, Glenn Simpson, the head of this company, or this unit of this
Fusion
company,
GPS.
Correct, is recounting what Christopher Steele, the former British spy who actually did the research, told him. So he says, we believed Chris Steele, and the FBI believed Chris Steele because we thought this was so incendiary, or Chris Steele did, that he went to the FBI with it. What did he go to the FBI with? Some sort of evidence, which we haven't seen, of a regular but surreptitious communication between agents of the Kremlin and the Trump campaign. Now, I have to believe that Bob Mueller already knows about these allegations and has decided whether the evidence is credible or not. The other thing that struck me is there's a lot in there about the president's business dealings from the years before he was president with Russian mobsters and agents of Russian security services, none of which is good for him. And if Bob Mueller decides to ask him about this, I don't know how he'd be able to answer it.
If it's true. I mean, and
right.
We don't know, that doesn't break down what the sourcing of all of that is.
Correct.
However, the allegations are pretty detailed. One of the things that was brought up in the Senate testimony was that he had said somebody died because of their investigation.
Yes.
Here, he's asked about that. If a source was killed, he says, there was a series of episodes where people were arrested or died mysteriously, talking about in Russia. They came shortly after the disclosure of the existence of this information. I do believe there's a bit of old-fashioned purge, but to my knowledge, it wasn't anyone that helped us. I think it was more likely people who were taking the opportunity to settle scores or were falsely accused. Bottom line, he's walking back what he said in the first time.
Right. Look, I say this as somebody that likes the president and has known him for years and wants him to succeed. But if there is evidence to substantiate the allegations in this testimony, this is a constitutional crisis coming our way.
And we'll see where it goes. Obviously, the Mueller investigation, we don't know when it'll end. To that point, the president's lawyer talked to Major Garrett from CBS. Take a listen to some more of this.
Is it, from your vantage point right now, Ty Cobb, a virtual certainty that the president will have some Q&A with the special counsel, Robert Mueller?
That's my belief.
And do you think there is any danger for the president in that encounter?
I would hope that a fair-minded Office of Special Counsel would approach it in a dutiful way, consistent with precedent, and it wouldn't be a mere perjury trap. And the president's very eager to sit down and explain whatever is responsive to the questions that the Office of Special. Very eager.
He says he's very eager, but you're the president's attorney. Would you have him sit down?
I would do everything I could to temper that eagerness. There's an old one-liner with which Ty Cobb is familiar. Don't talk to a guy that owns a grand jury, because he will find a way to trap you by reading to the grand jury what you told him and comparing it with other evidence. Never, 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 I can't say never enough, let your client sit down with the prosecutors who are trying to develop a case against him. Never expect them to be fair. Never expect them to tell everything that they know. You will never know, and your client, the president, will never know everything that they know about him. It's a recipe for disaster.
Well, it'll be interesting to see. Hope Hicks, the communications director, was scheduled to appear, we were told, on the House Intel side, is not going to tomorrow. We will follow all the elements. Judge, as always, thanks.
A pleasure, Brett.
Going down to the wire on the government shutdown. We'll talk about it all with the panel when we come back.
We will be opposing this continuing resolution because while they put the chip program in there, they do not put the accompanying provisions that make chip work.
The most responsible thing we can do is avoid that chaos and pass this continuing resolution that we're bringing to the floor.
The CR prepared by the Speaker is not an honest attempt to govern.
We can pass a non-controversial bipartisan bill to keep the government open, or Democrats in Congress can manufacture a crisis and force a government shutdown over the entirely unrelated issue of illegal immigration.
Well, at this hour, Congress is not sure whether they're going to have the votes. Maybe in the House side they do, but in the Senate side it looks more doubtful at this hour. Senator McConnell putting out a letter to Senate Republicans earlier. We should all plan to stay through this weekend if Senate Democrats follow through and are willing to shut down the government and the Children's Health Insurance Program. That's CHIP that Representative Pelosi was mentioning earlier, because they have yet to conclude a deal on DACA. This is an irresponsible position to take, as everything from pay for our military to processing Social Security checks will be affected. I hope not a single Republican is inclined to join them. I know we're all frustrated by the pace of negotiations on spending, but joining Democrats to shut down the government plays right into the Democrats' hand. Well, Senator Lindsey Graham put out a statement saying he's one of them, and there may be others. Let's bring in our panel. Jonah Goldberg, senior editor at National Review, Amy Walter, national editor for the Cook Political Report, and Steve Hilton is a former advisor to British Prime Minister David Cameron and host of The Next Revolution here on Fox News Channel. Amy, just in the past minute or so, the Freedom Caucus saying they're warming up to the idea of supporting the continuing resolution, in part because they're going to have another vote to bolster military readiness. But it is nip and tuck up there.
It is. We knew this going in. And look, this has been pretty much of a constant, even in the Boehner era, nonetheless, the Paul Ryan era, of a conference that still does not have the ability to be organized in one, nice, tight movement. We thought that maybe the president was going to be able to bring the party together, right? We spent most of 2016 talking about the party kind of breaking apart. Now here's a chance for a unifying moment. But the problems that were there before Donald Trump was president remain even as president. Issues about spending, issues about immigration still divide the party. They're going to continue to divide the party, whether it's in the House. And the other issue, of course, going forward, which we're going to talk about, is it may pass the House, but I think you're exactly right. The Senate is a whole different ball of wax. Not only do they need Democrats to support this, but right now I think they've lost, Mitch McConnell has lost at least 2 Republicans, maybe 3. So that means getting 11 to 12 Democrats.
Yeah, I think Lindsey Graham, Rand Paul,
right,
and there may be others.
And also, McCain and Cochran aren't necessarily going to be there for the vote, right? So you're starting with basically 49, which is a problem.
Yeah. So what does this mean about the ability of Republicans to control the White House, the Senate, and the House, and the ability to have government function, period?
Yeah, well, I don't think it speaks very well, and obviously these are divisions, as Amy was saying, that go back a good ways. I think in some ways you could sort of see one of these divisions in the sort of implosion of an immigration deal this week, because Lindsey Graham may speak for a handful of Republicans, but he actually doesn't speak for the ideological conservatives of the Republican Party. It was a bipartisan deal in the sense that Lindsey Graham essentially agreed with all of the Democrats on this. It would have been a much more productive thing to work out a compromise with someone like Tom Cotton, who actually speaks for the sort of the broader base of conservatives and Republicans. But that's the problem, is that there are some large fault lines that run right through the Republican Party and the conservative movement, and it doesn't seem like Donald Trump has a hands-on understanding of where they are or how to put them all together. Everyone seems to want to give Donald Trump wins, but that may not be enough.
Well, he has his thumbs on his Twitter account just in the past minute. House of Representatives needs to pass government funding bill tonight. So important for our country. Our military needs it. Steve.
Look, I think we're long past overdue for a proper reckoning on all this. I actually find myself somewhat agreeing with Lindsey Graham that we don't need another short-term deal, but I would go much further. We don't need a long-term deal either. What we need is a real deep rethink of the federal government, the whole role of it, and the structure of what goes on in Washington, D.C., because the reason that we're in this endless crisis is that everyone on the Hill, they're fighting for their piece of the pie. That is driven by the interest that got them there. The unions on the left and the big businesses and big donors on the right. It is the swamp in action. Everyone's fighting for something. The bigger the pie is, the bigger that the fight is. And the real answer here is actually to rethink the role of the federal government, to start thinking about what functions could be done better at the state level or even more local than that. Now, I don't see any sign of that happening, but that's the real long-term answer.
Right. But I guess, Amy, politically, in a midterm election year, you've got this tax reform law now that is kicking in a lot of states. A lot of companies are funneling money in. Apple with that big announcement. The stock market's cooking. And if the government shuts down, it kind of squelches a little of the politics
of the momentum.
That's already Republican not friendly.
That's right. I mean, it really depends on how long, if there is a shutdown, how long it would be. Would it really have an impact on the economy? But I think to your broader point, it's exactly right, which is the fact that, Republicans are finally starting to get some momentum. The economy, as you said, cooking along. The president today made a good speech in Pennsylvania, making the case for why the economy is doing better and why Republicans should be rewarded for that. But a lot of the impetus for passing the tax bill beyond its policy component was for Republicans to prove, after failing at repealing Obamacare, that indeed they could walk and chew gum. They could pass legislation. They could do things just with Republican votes, and that they were not dysfunctional. Now, here we have something that's supposed to be easy, keeping the government running. If you can't do the easy stuff, how are we going to get to all this talk about infrastructure and something else big happening between now and the end of the year? Seems impossible.
I mean, we know that there are a lot of Republicans out there who say, shut it down because, the government needs to be reformed and all that stuff, but it's not a good thing overall. This was interesting today. The New York Times, using its editorial page and putting letters from Trump voters who are talking about year one. I hadn't seen that before, and it kind of shows a little bit maybe of the disconnect of the conventional wisdom that it's going to be this huge Democratic wave, but there are still folks who say, hey, listen, I'm on board to what he's doing.
No, I was very much in favor of what the New York Times did. To me, it was sort of a service to their readers, because a lot of the regular readers of the New York Times never hear the pro-Trump point of view, and it sort of punctured a hole in the Pauline Kaelism of the whole thing. That said, I think it's really very much not in Donald Trump's interest for the government to shut down. I think you can have a very legitimate argument about who deserves blame. It's very difficult to figure out, to predict it, because we never had a shutdown where one party controlled all three branches of government. I'm totally open to the idea that on the merits, Democrats are to be blamed. But I think that generally speaking, outside of those people who basically make up 34% in the polls, when you have chaos in Washington, when things don't seem to be running right, the media narrative, the Democratic messaging, that runs against Donald Trump's interests. Chaos is going to get blamed on Donald Trump, fairly or not. And I think Amy's exactly right. Republicans are getting a little momentum. I think things still look bad for 2018. But why you would want to derail the news about things like this Apple move and the rest is beyond me.
We're going to talk more about this and the Chief of Staff, what he said here last night and how it factors into the negotiations, continuing this discussion after the break.